Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to my presentation. I'm Dr. Anna Ng from Caritas Institute of Higher Education, Hong Kong, China. The topic of my paper is Impacts of Religiosity and Spirituality on Attitudes towards Sexuality Education among Adolescents. Adolescents are becoming active in exploring sexuality and intimate relationships, and we find that they tend to engage in risky sexual activity without accurate sexual knowledge. And they turn to peers or mass media for sexual information. And we find that their sexual attitudes are mainly acquired through magazines or internet, which might contain distorted sex knowledge and improper attitudes. For school-based sexuality education, we find that as most adolescents are secondary school students, school-based sexuality education, SBSE in short form, should shoulder their responsibility to provide accurate sexual knowledge and foster positive sexual attitude. Among many factors that influence the efficacy of SBSE, religiosity and spirituality, awareness of adolescents should be considered. According to Murray, awareness not only relates to adolescents' identity formation, but also their attitude, sexual attitudes in particular, which in turn would affect the efficacy of school-based sexuality education. Definition of religiosity, R, and spirituality, S. Religiosity refers to the formal, institutional, and outward expression of the sacred, belief and practices associated with a religious denomination. And for spirituality, S affirms and honor a transcendence in life, that meaning and purpose in life, internal and personal expressions of a connection to itself, so to themselves, others, or the nature. So religiosity and spirituality are correlated through these definitions, as you can see. And for adolescents, as they undergo changes in cognitive, social, and emotional realms, and there's increased capacity for abstract thinking, and which would enhance the opportunity for spiritual thinking or spiritual awakening. And such changes influence the expression of religiosity and as well as the spirituality. Of course, for adolescents, they are undergoing three psychological processes, which interplay in adolescence. First, they might be aware of the strength and beauty in the world and within self, and that cultivates meaning and purpose in life. Second, they're seeking and also experiencing significant experiences with others and transcendent figures. As you can see, we find that the third aspect of the psychological process is adolescents tend to express their own values and passions that promotes a sense of inner harmony. So it is these three psychological processes that would help us to understand adolescence or why the factor of religiosity and spirituality is being explored in the study. So there's this relevancy of adolescence, religiosity, and spirituality. Awareness are relevant to identity formation and influence on sexual attitudes of that adolescents. And the exploration of adolescence towards religiosity or spirituality is logical for our study, because both were related to sexual risk and importance in adolescence life. So religiosity and spirituality were associated with conservative sexual attitudes, according to Beckfin and Morrow, and they were protective factors against risky sexual behavior, according to Hayward. study. And we also find that in the literature, we find that higher religiosity would be less supportive of comprehensive sexuality education. And the association of spirituality and school-based sexuality education is less certain, as we find in the literature. It is expected that it might be negatively related to the attitude towards school-based sexuality education. And the objective of this study is to describe students' sexual attitude and their views on school-based sexuality. Because if we want to promote SBSE in secondary school, so we have to sort out their attitudes towards SBSE as well as their sexual attitudes first. And second, we're going to study the impact of religiosity and spirituality on sexual attitudes and attitude towards SBSE. And we have 4 hypotheses. First, we want to test whether religiosity and spirituality are correlated. Second, religiosity and spirituality are negatively related to sexuality. And the third hypothesis is religiosity and spirituality are negatively related to SBSE. And fourth, liberal sexual attitude is associated with positive attitude towards SBSE. And we use convenience sampling. This is cross-sectional study that collects data via convenience sampling through the administration of questionnaire in the classroom of secondary schools. And the second way is we design a questionnaire when put the questionnaire online and invite voluntary and anonymous participation from students. So the following 4 measuring instruments were incorporated in the questionnaire. First, we have RS, the religiosity scale. Second, the SS, spirituality scale. And third, sexual attitude scale, SAS. And fourth one is the attitude scale towards SBSE, ASBSE. All measures have been cross-validated in Hong Kong and with satisfactory reliability and validity. And for the religiosity scale, originally it's been developed by Kuning and Bussing in 2010. It consists of 5 items, such as the religion beliefs lie behind my whole of life, and it's rated on 5 or 6-point scale. 1 means never, and 6 means more than twice a week. And the score range is 5 to 29. Midpoint is 16. Highest score represents higher levels of religiosity. And spirituality scale is being developed in 1982 by Persian and Ellison. There are 10 items, such as I believe there is some real purpose in my life. It is a 6-point scale. 1 represents strongly disagree and 6 strongly agree. And the score ranges from 10 to 60. And the midpoint is 30. Higher score means higher levels of spirituality. The SAS sexual attitude scale from Fisher and Hall developed in 1988. There are 13 items. Sample items include homosexual behavior is an acceptable variation in sexual orientation. And it's a 4-point scale. 1 represents strongly disagree, and the 4th represents strongly agree. Excuse me, there's a typo here. First means strongly disagree, and 4 means strongly agree. Yeah. And then we have the score range. The score range is 13 to 42, and the midpoint is 32.5. And the highest score means more liberal in sexual attitude. So it's correct here now. And then we have the attitude towards SBSE, the ASBSE scale, developed specifically for this study. There are 8 items. Examples: sexuality education should be implemented in school. And it's a 4-point scale. 1 represents strongly disagree, and 4 represents strongly agree. And the score range is 8 to 32. The midpoint is 20. And higher scores means more positive attitude towards SBSE. And data collection procedure. Questionnaire designed for data collection. It consists of 3 sections. First, purpose and significance of study. And second, demographic characteristics, gender, age, grade, and religion. And third, measuring instruments. Participants were recruited from 3 secondary schools via convenient sampling, and participation was voluntary and anonymous. And of course, as I said before, besides these 3 secondary schools, we also conduct online questionnaire as well. And there are a total of 818 secondary school students participate in this survey research. The age range is 12 to 19, and more than 70% were males, and their year of studies grade 7 to grade 12. Religiosity and spirituality. We find that religiosity and spirituality were correlated, and though the correlation is mild, as you can see, the p-value is 0.68, and it's positive and significant. The p-value is smaller than 0.05. So hypothesis A is therefore empirical support, showing that religiosity and spirituality are correlated. And the descriptive statistics, the test score, if the score is lower than 50, it will be regarded as very low, and 50 to 59 is regarded as low score, and 60 to 69 is regarded as high score. And if the score is greater than 70% of the maximum score, it will be regarded as having a very high score. So the mean score of measure was compared with its midpoint. So here's the scores on religiosity and spirituality. We find that 70% scored higher, of the students score high in spirituality, and less than 60% high in religiosity. So this, according to our one sample t-test, the mean score of religiosity is lower than the midpoint, and the mean score of spirituality is higher than the midpoint. And we find that more than 65, that is more than 75, that's 6.2% of these students have no religious affiliation. So we can, from these findings, we can describe that these students are spiritual but not religious. So according to Allison, the term can be, they can be regarded as a group of students with SBNR, spiritual but not religious. So these adolescents who proclaim SBNR tend to consider religious beliefs are not essential. Second, they value individual autonomy, and they also consider themselves as free thinkers. Excuse me. Descriptive statistics of sexual attitude and views on SBSE, we find that generally speaking, they are liberal in sexual attitude. As you can see here, we group this high and very high score together, and we get more than 90%. 93.1% of them are having showing high support towards SBSE. The attitude is positive, right? And this is consistent with the findings in the West. And also their attitude, sexual attitude is also liberal here. You can see here. And then also the attitude towards SBSE also very high, right? So these two indicates that they are having liberal sexual attitude and also supportive towards school-based sexuality education. And what about the association of religiosity and spirituality then? We find that RNS are negatively related to sexual attitude, that is, they associate with conservative sexual attitude. And this is consistent with Western findings as well, right? And in view of the above finding, we can see the hypothesis B, which states that religiosity and spirituality are negatively related to sexual attitude, is empirically demonstrated. What about religiosity and spirituality's relationship towards with SBSE? As shown in this table, we find that both religiosity and spirituality were positively related to SBSE, which is opposite to what's predicted by hypothesis C. That means hypothesis C, which states that religiosity and spirituality are negatively related to SBSE, is not support. So our findings were inconsistent with the Western findings regarding this point, as you can see from this table, right? This is religiosity and this is spirituality, and then they are negatively related to sexual attitude. That means if their sexual attitude is positive and then it is more open, then they are not supportive towards school-based sexuality education. So hypothesis is not support. What's the reason behind that? We find the popular use for the mass media in Hong Kong, mainly occupied filled with porn magazines or internet, disseminating sexual information. Right? The sexual information for youngsters, they mainly get this information from the mass media. And then the media tend to propagate promiscuous sexual activities. So students with religiosity and spirituality, with higher scores, they tend to hold more conservative sexual attitudes, and they would rather obtain information from formal setting of schools more than from the mass media. And that's why they show positive attitudes towards school-based sexuality education. And the correlation of sexual attitude and views on SBSE, we find that sexual attitude were negatively associated with positive views on school-based sexuality education. So students holding more liberal sexual attitude were less supportive of school-based sexuality education. So that's why we can say that the hypothesis D, liberal sexuality, is associated with positive attitude towards school-based sexuality. It's therefore rejected. So the hypothesis D is not being supported in the study. So to conclude, consistent with the Western finding, we find that there's greater majority of students were supportive of school-based sexuality education. And then for religiosity and spirituality, they were associated with conservative sexual attitudes. This is consistent with the Western finding. But inconsistent with the Western finding, we find that liberal sexual attitudes, students with liberal sexual attitudes, they were negatively related to school-based sexuality education. That means if they are liberal in, they are open, having a more liberal sexual attitude, they tend to be less supportive to school-based sexuality education. And we also find that religiosity and spirituality were positively associated with school-based sexuality education. That means students with higher score in religiosity and spirituality, they tend to support school-based sexuality education. So implications, this study revealed findings inconsistent with those reported in the West. Cross-cultural differences in factors associated with school-based sexual education should be considered, and factors specific to the local cultural settings to be considered in the implementation of school-based sexuality education. Okay, here comes our references. Thank you.